in December, he was in a very weak position. And the trouble is, from a commentator's perspective, a lot of people assess the success or otherwise in the conflict on how much the Frontline has moved. And 2024 was an interesting year. He managed to blunt the Ukrainian counteroffensive that had started in 2023. He managed to push forward in the east and was pushing the Ukrainians back at a time when politically or geopolitically, the Americans were withholding $60 billion worth of potential aid, and the Ukrainians were suffering, and Putin got some momentum. Then all of a sudden, the Ukrainians managed to, and this is just frontline stuff, get some of the momentum back again and get the initiative back whenever they had their invasion into the Kursk region. But then that hasn't really gone anywhere, and they haven't exploited that. But we're looking at things from a tactical perspective. This conflict isn't going to be solved on who wins from the tactical side of things. That will set some of the conditions, but it's going to be resolved on who wins at the operational level in military planning terms, and then at the strategic level. The strategic level is when the international community comes together and we get the negotiations and we get the pressure. Trump putting the pressure on Putin and Zelensky at the moment is that strategic level pressure. But at the operational level, Russia's ability and Ukraine's ability to continue to prosecute operations and to inform and influence what's going on at that strategic level is down to the impact on economics, the impact on personnel, the impact on your defence industrial base and everything else. And if we look at Russia from an economic perspective, it is beginning to fall apart. It's hurting Russia enormously. And that's because Zelensky, the Ukrainians have been attacking Russian oil infrastructure, their gas infrastructure, their railway lines, their defence manufacturing capability, airfields inside Russia. They've been taking the fight into Russia. Kursk helped with that, but the Russian, the manpower cost for the Russians over 2024, UK Defence Intelligence has agreed with Ukraine and put the loss of manpower for every day over 2024, loss of Russian manpower in the 1,400 to 1,600 personnel a day bracket. That's unsustainable. And we can see that with Putin having to bring in North Korean troops, increase his recruiting in Africa, try and get some recruiting from Yemen, and then defence industrial base, ammunition from North Korea. He's still relying on Iran to provide capability. This does not bode well for Putin's position to continue to prosecute his tactical battle, and he's losing at the operational level.
And we know for years Putin has essentially outsourced economic policy to the governor of the central bank in Russia, who by all accounts is increasingly raising concerns about the long-term cost of this war. So the economics will be fascinating in the year ahead. We have also seen in recent weeks, Finland, for example, calling out Russia, trying to disrupt some of the underwater sea cables in the Baltic Sea, which is all part of Putin, I suppose, trying to lay the groundwork for what may be negotiations and try and bend the political climate in his favour by trying to wearing down public appetite in Europe for supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is with the cables, he's used, in one case, Chinese registered shipping, and therefore there's this link between Putin and Xi Jinping and trying to get this, cement this axis of evil, as we keep describing it, between Russia, China, North Korea and Iran. And then economically bringing in the wider BRICS community, who are trying to rival the EU and the United States' dominance in economics around the world. It's fascinating to see how that's playing out. Everyone's trying to position themselves. Putin is trying to position himself, but from a threat perspective. He's using this attack on our undersea infrastructure as a threat to the West, to say, I can really disrupt your lives in a way that you haven't seen beforehand. Of course, we had back in 22, the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline issue. Still haven't definitively said who was responsible behind that. We have the Ukrainians just turn off the gas transit through of Russian gas going through Ukraine out into the rest of Europe, which will hurt a number of different countries that are around the place. Interestingly, and this doesn't come out in the commentary, Ukraine will lose tens of millions of dollars in transit fees because they were making money out of it.
It does hurt Ukraine,
So it'll hurt Ukraine a little bit, but it'll hurt Russia even more. And it's this economic impact on Russia's ability to prosecute the war. When Donald Trump gets in, I think the biggest tool that he will have to influence and get both sides to the negotiating table will be an economic one. If he can get the global oil price to drop dramatically, that will cause a run on the Russian ruble, on the Russian economy, and we may find that the head of the Russian central bank and others take up window cleaning jobs.
And we're having this conversation at the start of January. Obviously, Trump is inaugurated in about 3 weeks' time. I suppose the thing you've got to say about Trump is part of his playbook is to be unpredictable.
Yeah.
You know, he senses an opportunity in both the Kremlin and Kyiv having no real sense of definitively what he's going to do. Yes, he's made these comments in the past, which I think far too much has been made of the whole we can end the war in 24 hours. As you said, he can't. But we don't know what he's really going to do. We can speculate, but we don't fundamentally know what approach he's going to take.
But see, I don't think he knows exactly what he's going to take.
That's
and therefore what he's doing is, I remember during the first Gulf War, General Rupert Smith commanded the British forces, and he was talking about intelligence and if there's difficulty in catching it. He said it's like watching, it's like having a still mill pond. And if there's no ripples on it and you can't see anything, take a rock, throw it in and watch the ripples. So Donald Trump's team have been throwing rocks into the mill ponds in Vladimir Putin's mill pond and into President Zelensky's mill pond and into the NATO mill pond and elsewhere and watching the ripples. That will inform where they're going to go from a policy perspective. And the reactions out of different people have been interesting. The pebble that was thrown into Putin's mill pond was a phone call allegedly between Trump and Putin, which Putin's team has denied happened, and Peskov came out and said it didn't happen. That's Putin's
Why would they deny that phone call took place? Because surely that would be a routine phone call.
A potential routine phone call, and given the speculation that Trump and Putin were close and could negotiate something, the only reason why the denial would happen is Putin didn't get out of it what he was expecting to get out of it, and that then turns into the reaction that happened afterwards, where immediately in Russian national television they broadcast naked pictures of Melania Trump for a period of time. That's good old Russian intelligence officers threatening behaviour, and Putin's a good old-fashioned Russian intelligence officer.
High risk, though. Do you think there's a chance, Philip, that Ukraine may not be, in the grand scheme of things, that high on Donald Trump's agenda? He will have domestic concerns. He'll want to sort out the situation on the border. He'll want to take a number of economic measures, including possibly passing fresh tax cuts. And then internationally, he may be more concerned about the situation in the Middle East and also keeping an eye on the trade relationship with China and potential threats to Taiwan. And of course, Ukraine is incredibly important. We all agree on that. But in Donald Trump's mind, do you think it may be lower down than sometimes we fully appreciate?
That's a very difficult one. I think Donald Trump will want to try and kick any finality off into the long grass, because it is not good whatever solution he comes up with. So if he forces Ukraine by not providing further military support, and Europe and the rest of NATO doesn't step up to provide that delta that would be created, then Putin would see it as a victory if he can keep any territory. Now, if Putin sees it as a victory if he can keep any territory, then Xi Jinping, who is putting a lot of pressure on Taiwan and across the Paracel and Spratly Islands and the South and East China Seas, he's going to look at Taiwan and go, actually, this year is year 3 of Putin's special military operation. Xi Jinping's going to go, well, actually, if I only have to get the wrath of the international community for 3 years, and actually I've got greater economic power than Russia and Ukraine, so I can probably get that down to 18 months if I physically take Taiwan, he'd do it. And I think he's sitting waiting for that. And therefore, if he sees the potential for victory, we then get a Southeast Asian pivot, we're then all in trouble, because there's a real danger that all of them are just going to merge together.
You made a great point earlier about the fact that actually the money that is being spent on military aid for Ukraine is being spent in the US,
yes,
and that has a positive impact on the US economy. But why is it that many Republicans, people like J.D. Vance, people like Donald Trump Jr., clearly don't see it that way and see it as a cost for the American people?
Because we've got politics by soundbite, quite simply. And the soundbites that were being put out around support to Ukraine were during the election. So it aimed at an internal audience. And if you look at some of the more substantive comments that came in, put JD Vance to one side, where people were saying, we're criticizing US support to Ukraine. Actually, when you get into the detail of what they're criticizing US support to Ukraine because there was no plan from the Democrats for how this was going to then end. And therefore, it was an implied criticism of the Democrats' policy and Joe Biden's policy with regard to Ukraine. When Trump's team comes in, they can turn around and say, "Oh, we've got our policy right. We know how we're going to end this, and therefore, we haven't broken any election promises by continuing our support. We've now got a plan, and we criticize them for the plan." You get so many politicians in the United States, a very small percentage of the American population have got passports and know where other countries are around the world. And I would suspect very few Americans could actually pinpoint Ukraine on a map. And therefore, when you get comments coming out of them about US taxpayers' dollars being spent in these foreign countries, they don't quite understand how it's being paid.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.